I'm joined now by Jann Smith from the Alcohol, Tobacco and Other Drugs Council. She joins me from Hobart. Jann Smith, the Tasmanian Health Minister says this is an idea that's worthy of consideration and she's asked the Commissioner for Children in Tasmania to investigate. Do you think that this is a good idea?
Well, I certainly think that this is an idea that we should explore, because we know that in Tasmania, like other places in Australia, that we have a really high incidence of harm that's caused by smoking.
It sounds most unusual, though, to ban anyone born after the year 2000 from buying cigarettes once they turn 18. Have you ever heard of this sort of proposal being attempted anywhere else?
Yes, I believe, I don't know the detail, but I do believe that this has been explored and in fact implemented in some other countries. But I think the most important thing is that this is an opportunity for Tasmania to really investigate and explore some of these various mechanisms that might actually reduce the number of people who take up smoking.
Do you think this sort of prohibition, though, can really work? Sometimes it just drives the demand for a product underground.
Well, that's absolutely one of the key issues that the members of my council and the organisations that we represent think needs to be considered in any exploration of this type of issue. We know that prohibition hasn't worked for some illicit substances, so we need to be very careful when we start to talk prohibition.
A prominent Tasmanian barrister, Greg Barnes, said today that this idea was discriminatory and stupid, and he said if you want to create a black market for cigarettes, this is just the way to do it. Do you think it might perhaps be a little ill-informed to go down this trail?
Well, I think that it certainly, there is some evidence that if you reduce the availability and also the exposure of people to substances, whether they be tobacco or illicit substances, that you will actually reduce the uptake and then the harm that's caused. But again, we do also know that an illicit market doesn't necessarily mean that the use of a drug, particularly one like tobacco, disappears.
Now, of course, there's always the prospect of a legal challenge, and we saw the tobacco companies taking the case all the way to the High Court to try to stop the plain packaging of cigarettes, a challenge that they lost. But is that something to be feared? I would imagine that the tobacco companies would certainly be getting their lawyers onto this if it went ahead.
I think so, but I think that one of the important factors here is that the Tasmanian government and I think also the Australian government have shown that we need to not be fearful of big tobacco. We need to actually be courageous, and we have a responsibility to the people of our community to actually make sure that we inform them about the harms that come from a substance that although legal is actually one of the greatest killers of our society in our time.
Well, let me ask you about how big of a problem is smoking in Tasmania. Are the rates higher than some of the mainland states, for example?
Traditionally, the rates have always been higher in Tasmania, so we have had rates up into the region of 21% in the past of people who in their lifetime had smoked tobacco. We saw some fairly significant and very promising reductions in those rates of smoking that have actually, we think, been impacted by a number of the regulations and the health reforms that have occurred in Tasmania. We've taken a fairly strong position in Tasmania about the availability or the places in which people can smoke, and have also really endorsed the decisions to move toward providing nicotine replacement on the public benefit.
All right.
On the PBS.
Okay, well, we'll see if the idea...
benefits.
Yes, indeed. We'll see if this idea progresses. Jann Smith from the Alcohol, Tobacco and Other Drugs Council, thank you very much for joining us from Hobart.